Russ Cohen is our speaker tonight. I've known him for a few years. He's unbelievably knowledgeable about edible plants, as we're about to discover. And he's written a book. I hope you've got the book. If not, I'm sure it's for sale. Is that right?
Yes, the books are $15, and the land trust that published the book gets all the money.
Okay. And Russ's daytime job is with the Mass Division of Fisheries and Game, and you're a specialist in
Rivers.
Rivers.
Right.
And but outside of his job, he's looking for edible plants. Russ Cohen.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Please save your applause for the end. Make sure I deserve it. So I have a ton of slides, more than I usually have, because I had this idea that it was going to totally wash out today. And instead of walking around DAcres, we're going to have to come inside and look at slides. So I actually have more than I usually have, so I'm going to have to go faster through them than I usually do, and I apologize in advance for that. So if you think I'm rather abrupt on some things, just in my enthusiasm to get to the next thing, I might cut a little short on the thing that I'm talking about.
You can always say as long as you want for questions.
But these slides are organized more or less chronologically by whatever the foraging opportunity is. And so these plants are around all the time, but it might be just a small window of availability at the time when the edible part is around. Or for some things, they can be around for months. It just depends on the plant. But foraging makes you hyper-aware of seasonality in a way we've kind of lost touch of as a culture, because we've gotten kind of used to the fact that going to the store and buying anything we want any of the day of the year we want. And in nature, things don't work that way. So, you know, like black locusts, which are in the show and grow here at DAcres, you know, the edible part of the flowers, and the flowers are available for about a 10-day period in May, and up here it might be early June. And if you miss that time period, that's it. You got to wait for that time period to come around again, unless you cheat and go up to, like, you know, Jackson, New Hampshire, where the growing season is a week later, and then catch up to the plant where it hasn't gotten as far in the growing season. But other than that, you're stuck. And some people feel frustrated by that. But to me, I look at that as, okay, so that season's done. Now it's the next season. You know, there's a constant changing variety of things coming into season, going out of season, through the seasons. And rather than, you know, these being sort of artificially created Hallmark card type holidays, these are actual phenological events in the calendar. So these correspond very closely to nature's rhythm. So foraging makes you really hyper aware of seasonality. And also plant communities. Like today, we were walking along the trail and we saw wintergreen, and I said, well, partridgeberry is a member of the same plant community as wintergreen. I bet we see partridgeberry, and then 10 minutes later, there was the partridgeberry. So that's often, you get a sixth sense as you're a forager as you begin to, you know, wander through landscapes and see relationships and stuff. So in case you're wondering, I am not a vegetarian. I'm omnivorous, and I eat pretty much anything. I actually have a relatively conventional diet. And so, you know, I go to supermarkets and restaurants, and I also patronize farm stands at farmers markets, and I grow a lot of fruits and vegetables at home. But in addition to that, there's all these wild things that I'm eating too. But it's a fun complement to conventional diets. It's not meant to substitute for just eating regular food. And also, in case you're wondering, I do this as a passionate avocation. This is not something I do for income. This is something I do just for fun, because I really enjoy connecting to the outdoors through my taste buds. And I hope you catch some of that enthusiasm today as we go through the show. All right, so yes, just
careful about the cords.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay, everybody get comfortable there. So before I plunge into the show, I just want to make one remark about conservation, because I do forage in a conservation-minded way, and I encourage you, if you're picking plants and mushrooms in the wild, that you keep that in mind too, because especially when native species are involved, these are plants that often have important roles in ecosystems. Animals rely upon them for food as some other important portion of the life cycle. So it's important not to pick so much that you might upset the ecological balance. So usually people picking at a very small scale for themselves or for a couple friends or families and stuff, it's unlikely to get into that problem. But even so, as you'll see in the show, there are some plants that are uncommon in the landscape, or the part that you eat is very traumatic to the plant, and those you just have to be very, use a lot of forbearance in making sure that you're not picking too much. But on the other hand, as you'll see in the show, there's lots of edible weeds and invasive species, and those offer guilt-free foraging opportunities because those are so super abundant in the landscape. You really can't pick too much. So that's the plants I can get particularly enthusiastic about encouraging people to eat because it's much less likely that any detrimental impact to the ecosystem is going to happen. All right, so the show covers all of New England, so there's a lot of stuff in here that you're not going to find in Dorchester, New Hampshire, like all the seaweeds, for example. Right? But I did make sure to put plants in that are local to this area for those of you that are local, plants that you might encounter on a walk or something like that. All right, so I wish I had more time to do my whole intro spiel, but I'm going to take away from the slides if I do that. So let me just plunge into the slides. And once again, we're organizing things here chronologically by the season. So here's one of the first plants people are looking for. And this is the ostrich fern fiddlehead, which we didn't see any of today here at DAcres, but if you go further west in New Hampshire, toward the Connecticut Valley or the Merrimack Valley, the places you're most likely to see it, likes habitat like this, alluvial floodplain habitat. And what you want to look for are the fiddleheads are in a vase-shaped clump. They have this little U-shaped gouge that runs down the center of the stalk like that. See right there? There's paper little scales that flake off really easily with your fingers. And then right here, sometimes you'll see the fertile frond, the spore-bearing fronds, often in pairs like that. So if you see all 5 of those characteristics, the right habitat, and the 4 other things, you know you have the ostrich fern. And this is the quote-unquote fiddlehead fern, the kind that you see for sale in the stores and stuff like that. And I suspect there's at least one person here who has bought them at a store, brought them home, cooked them up, and said, I'm not very excited. And you know, I have to admit that in the last few times I'd eaten fiddleheads before this spring, that was my attitude. And then I discovered a secret, which I'm going to share with you. And here's the secret. Think of them as sweet corn and cook them as soon as possible after you pick them, which is what this slide depicts. So Beth Basler in the photo there, she took the camp stove to the fiddlehead patch, and we cooked them 10 minutes after we picked them, and they were really good. So that's the secret. You know, once you're buying them in the store, they've often been shipped in from Canada. They've been sitting around for a while, and they're much less interesting than when you cook them right away. So that's the trick. Okay, so marsh marigolds are edible. This is a plant you have to cook before, you have to boil it before you eat it, because it's actually poisonous raw. And it's also a beautiful spring ephemeral wildflower, so this is not a plant that you want to harvest unless you're shooting a lot of it into alder thickets. I have seen a lot of it, but I put this in the show because this is a plant that country people in New Hampshire would routinely go out and gather in the spring, especially in the typical spring back then when nothing was happening in your garden and you just survived an entire winter eating food that you had put up in your root cellar or canned stuff, and you were just desperate for something green. So it was the fiddleheads and the marsh marigold leaves that offered, green opportunities to eat stuff early in the season. So I'm picking just 1 leaf per plant on this plant to make sure I'm not in any way hurting the plants. And as I said, you have to boil them. I even changed the water once on these, but the leaves don't shrink or get mushy on you even after all that boiling. So the flavor's a lot like spinach. You might say to yourself, I'll just go to the store and buy spinach, which is totally fine. But I want to teach you this one because it is a plant that's out there and it does have a long history of use as a wild edible. Okay, so here's stinging nettle, and this is a plant that you could recognize in the dark. This is a plant you could recognize even if you're blind. This does grow at DAcres, and this is the right stage to harvest it. It's usually at this stage in early April, and I'm just snipping the tops off and then throwing them into a bucket of water to wash them off, and then you just take some tongs. You're still not touching them because it might sting you. And you're taking the tongs and you're flinging them into the cooking pot. Basically, you're steaming the greens with the water still clinging to them from the washing process. So you steam them for about 5 minutes, and they look like that. And then they're done. And then the flavor, the closest thing I can think of that you might know to what stinging nettles taste like is split peas. And so you can eat them just plain like this, or you can incorporate them into different dishes. So here's a recipe from my book, Cream of Stinging Nettle Soup. That's yummy. Sounds like something they might have made in the old Addams Family TV. But the recipe's very easy. And then there's these stinging nettle balls, and this is basically this is a real retro recipe. This is where you're using Pepperidge Farm stuffing mix to basically, so it's that, from a 1950s Better Homes and Gardens type cookbook, and and they're very good. And you just substitute the stinging nettle for the spinach. Okay, here's a plant we saw today. This is catnip, and catnip does occasionally grow wild. It has the opposite effect on people that it has on cats. It's a tranquilizer, it's a sedative, so it helps people relax after a stressful day. And you can use the leaves fresh or dry. Okay, curled dock, we didn't see this one today, but it's a very common plant in farms and gardens, and you can boil the leaves briefly just to take away the little bitterness, and then you use them like spinach, so they're very good in spanakopita, the Greek spinach pie with the phyllo dough and the feta cheese. You use the blanched curled dock greens. Now this is actually the antidote to the sting in stinging nettles. You get stung by stinging nettle, you just juice up a dock leaf and put that juice on the sting. It helps make the sting go away. Okay, with this plant we saw today, it's very common along the roadsides around here. It's not at an edible stage now. It's about 7 feet tall and it has those white creamy blossoms on top of it. This is Japanese knotweed, which is added near the top of the ecological blacklist. So the ecologists really hate it, but it is really yummy, and I harvest a ton of it every year. And this is the first edible stage to get it. So what you would see in the knotweed patch in the spring is a bunch of dried bamboo-like stalks left over from last year. In the midst of that, you're going to see the shoots coming up, and they'll look like asparagus, but they'll have little red dots on the stems, and they'll cluster leaves up at the top. So you can just snap those off and steam them for a few minutes and eat them hot or cold like asparagus. But my favorite stage to eat them is when the stems get a little better, and I'm selecting the largest in diameter stalks I can, because I peel them, take the outer layer off, and then I chop them up and I use it instead of rhubarb in virtually any recipe calling for rhubarb. So here's my strawberry knotweed pie that I make every year, and virtually everybody I feed this to prefer it over strawberry rhubarb pie. It's really yummy. So you might be looking at that pie and say, oh, that's a latticework top. That's very intimidating. I don't think I can pull that off. Okay, I'm going to show you a way to use knotweed that requires no cooking skill whatsoever. Is you just take those stems and you fill them with a flavored cream cheese or a salmon mousse or something like that, and you have your little edible cups, and they're very good that way.
Are they raw?
Okay, those are raw, yes. Okay, so garlic mustard, another hated invasive species. I don't get quite as excited about eating this one, but it does taste like a garlic-flavored broccoli. You do mostly have to boil it because the flavor is too pungent to tolerate it as raw vegetable. So there's no poison that you're dissipating by boiling it. It's just toning down the level of the bitterness to make it acceptable. So that's one edible stage to get at it. My favorite edible stage, though, is when it's young, before it blooms. The central stalks, when they're nice and tender, those you can actually eat raw. And they taste like garlic-flavored broccoli, and you could eat them raw. You can chop them up and put them in a stir-fry. So here's wintercress. This is a very common garden weed and farm weed. And it's another one of the wild broccolis, and you're just basically eating this part of the plant. The leaves are edible too, but I'm mainly picking this part. And the flavor is identical to broccoli raw, and you do have to boil it, once again, just to tone down the bitterness for several minutes, but then it's very good. Okay, this plant, a lot of people mistake this plant as phlox, but it's actually Dame's rocket, and it's another member of the mustard family, so it's related to garlic mustard and the wintercress. And the way you know it's not phlox is if you look at each individual flower, you see that each one has 4 petals. All phlox family flowers have 5 petals. So that's one way to tell it apart. Also, you see how it comes in a white and a purpley color? That's invariably how you see it in the wild, the 2 colors together. So that helps to identify it. And this one is fun to eat because the flowers are edible raw. No cooking required whatsoever. They have a nice sweet garlic and radishy flavor. This is an invasive species, at least it's in that category in Massachusetts. So once again, total guilt-free foraging opportunity, all you want, and it's great. Okay, and although, it comes in white and purple, I tend to just use the purple color because purple is a funner color than white, but they have the same thing. Okay, so this photo was taken actually not that far from here. This is in the Mount Washington Valley in North Conway looking toward the presidential range. So that's Mount Washington in the background. Okay, right there. So, but the point of the photo is to talk to you about dandelions, because dandelions have probably turned more people off of eating wild plants than anything else. And the story usually goes like this, is you'll be in your yard in the spring and you look in your backyard and there's all these yellow flowers. You say, hey, I've heard dandelions are edible. I should try them. So you bring a few leaves indoors, you put a little oil and vinegar on them, you take one bite. It's incredibly bitter. You spit it out and you say, yuck, I'm never going to eat a wild plant again. Which is a real shame because dandelions are great if you eat the right part at the right time. And in my opinion, that's the flower buds before the flowers open. So these guys right here. And if you pick the dandelions not in a manicured lawn or a place like that where the plants are puny and sprayed with herbicides and stuff, no, you want to go to an edge of an organic farm where the plants get nice and big. And I found over 200 dandelion buds per plant. So they're relatively small, but you find plants like that. It takes a little while to pick them up, but you'll have eventually all you need to feed yourself, your dinner guests, whatever. And what I do with those dandelion buds is I blanch them as I drop them into boiling water for 60 seconds, and that's it. They're done. And you can put them into omelets or soups or casseroles. But before you do anything with them, before you put any oil or butter on them, just try them plain. You'd be amazed at how good they are. They're one of my favorite vegetables, period, cultivated or wild. They're like a cross between corn, spinach, Brussels sprouts, and artichokes. So okay, so here's salsify. This is a plant we didn't see today, and it's not that common, but I do occasionally run into it. And it's actually related to dandelions, and the flower looks like a dandelion, and the blowball looks just like a dandelion, except that this is 3 inches across. But the challenge with salsify is that, look at the leaves. The leaves look like grass. And that's the stage you want to harvest it before the flower comes out, before the blowball comes out, because you want to eat the developing greens and the root, which sort of tastes like oysters. That's why it's sometimes called oyster plant. So this is a tough one to find. But the secret, how you know it's not grass, is if you break a leaf off, it will have milky juice like a dandelion. And that will give you a hint that it's actually not a grass. Okay? All right, violets are edible, violet flowers are edible, violet leaves are edible until the flowers go away and the leaves are less appetizing. You can candy the flowers and put them on a cake like this black walnut cake. Chicory is edible. We didn't see this one today. And the plants are still making these flowers now in some places. The flowers are edible. They have virtually no flavor, so why eat them? Because blue is an unusual fruit color, so it's fun to just snip the petals off and use them to decorate a salad, whatever. And I explain how to do this in my book, but basically you can roast the roots and grind them up and make a beverage like coffee. It does not have caffeine in it, so if you're one of these people who says, what's the point of drinking it if there's no caffeine in it? Then the chicory drink's not going to cut it for you. Okay, chickweed is edible, and it's edible just straight into your mouth. I use it as a sprout substitute in a salad, in a sandwich, or a lettuce substitute in a salad. It has a very mild flavor. It's a long season availability, so in the cool weather in the spring and the cool weather in the fall, that's when to look for it. And very common farm and garden weed. Okay, sheep sorrel is edible. So this is a cousin of your standard French sorrel. And you look for the 2 little teeth in the bottom. That's how to recognize it. And this is an indicator of acid soil, by the way. So if you have this growing in your property, you don't have to get your soil tested, at least from that perspective. I'll tell you right now, it's going to be acid soil. And so this has a lemony flavor, and so does this plant, which we saw today. This is wood sorrel, and the plants aren't related. It's just a botanical coincidence that they have the same flavor. And the flavor is caused by oxalic acid, which is not good to eat in huge amounts, like a big salad bowl full of just this plant. If you ate that much, it could inhibit your body's ability to uptake calcium, and it could irritate your stomach lining, but there's no reason to be unduly concerned about that chemical because it's present in a lot of conventional vegetables like beets and spinach and rhubarb. So as long as you eat it in moderation, it's fine. Okay, and here's your native whitewood sorrel that you get in the White Mountains that you see on the trails and stuff. Beautiful flower with the candy stripes on it, and the leaves have that same sour flavor. So this is a fun plant to nibble on as you encounter it on your trail. Okay, daisies are edible, but the best part is the leaves before the flowers open. So that's the stage when everybody can recognize the plant. But actually, you want to be able to recognize the plant at this stage. And this is what it looks like before the flowers open. And one of the ways to identify it is if you look for the flower buds, you see how they have these markings on it, on the flat surface, almost like the spokes of a wheel. I apologize that it's not really in focus, or that one right there, but can you get the idea from it? Okay, so look for that, and then look for leaves that are this shape, and the daisy leaves have a wonderful flavor. I've never tried to cook with them because they're so good raw. I just will pick them off the plant, and the buds too can go, and they have a kind of a sweet radishy flavor, so very nice salad fodder. Okay, here's pineapple weed. We did see this one in the parking lot right in front of the barn today. And if you pinch the flowers, you see they have a smell like canned pineapple. You can make a tea from this, which tastes like canned pineapple. Okay, so here is peppergrass and poor man's pepper, two plants that are really hard to tell apart. You don't need to. They have the exact same flavor. They're edible the same way. So whichever one you find, you eat, that's fine. So this is a great plant to remember. This has a long season availability. Peppergrass is available from May until December. And it's very common. You probably have it in your backyard, or it's growing in the vacant lot down the street, or on the edge of the school ball field, something like that. And it's the flat seed pods are the main edible part on peppergrass, and they have a flavor like watercress, that kind of interesting, sharp flavor. No, it's white flowers. Right. So peppergrass is a great plant to remember if you've got company coming over for dinner and they show up early or they show up on time, or the roast, whatever you're making for them, isn't done yet and they're starving and you need to feed them something. So you go out in your yard and pick some peppergrass and strip those seed pods off, mix it with a little cream cheese, put it on some crackers and feed that to them, and they'll love it and they'll forget all about the fact that dinner is ready. Okay, so, and another way to use the peppergrass, if somebody's making roast beef and boursin sandwiches, which is what was happening on a program I was attending, and I saw peppergrass growing right outside the house where they were making the sandwiches, I said, why don't we add the peppergrass? And the leader said, sure. So that's what happened there. Okay, here's wild lettuce, and I'm sorry, it looks like the photo's a little out of focus there. But anyway, we did see wild lettuce today along the roadside, and even after it begins to bolt, begins to produce a stem like this, it's still edible. So it's this stage in early June in northern Massachusetts, so up here that would be like a week and a half later. And you can eat the stem and the leaves. What you want to do is look for the terminal lobe right here, and look for the pointy terminal lobe. So skinny like a finger. If it's broad like that, it's probably going to be one of its bitter relatives. There are no wild lettuces that are poisonous. There are just some that are bitter from the get-go. If you want to eat it raw, this is the species to look for. Okay, so when I make stuff from wild ingredients, I'm not a purist about it. Like, not 100% of the ingredients have to be wild. Like when I make a strawberry knotweed pie, I don't have to use yak butter for the shortening. I can use regular butter, regular sugar, and the knotweed makes it a wild pie. But it is fun to make a wild pie just from a wild salad, just from wild ingredients. But I don't want to dissuade you from just like throwing a few violet flowers in a salad. It's perfectly fine. So in this salad, we've got like chickweed and lamb's quarters and cheap sorrel, wood sorrel and stuff, the green part bulking up the salad. We've got partridge berries, the red berries, we'll talk about those in a second. The yellow flowers, mustard flower, the purpley flowers are chicory flowers, and then the orangey things that look like cherry tomatoes are actually a wild tomato relative called a ground cherry. Okay, so let's get to that. Okay, so there's partridge berry. We did see this in the woods today. And the very easy way to distinguish partridge berries, each berry has two little belly buttons on there instead of one. It's because each fruit is formed by two flowers that are fused to the base. For every two flowers, you get one fruit. And the partridge berries have virtually no flavor, so why use them? Once again, in that salad, just to add the visual interest on top of the salad.
Russ,
Okay, yes?
is that also known as kinnikinnick, as it is?
No, that's bearberry. That's a different plant. They're not related.
All right.
Right.
I've always thought that was the same.
No. Nope. Okay, so here is ground cherry, and this is a wild cousin of tomatoes. It's a really fun plant to find. And the fruit develops in something, the botanical term is called a calyx, and it's a husk that surrounds the fruit. So that's what's happening right here. You see how the husk, so the fruit's inside there. You cannot see the fruit ever until you pull that off. And so this will be green on the plant, and then it turns yellow, and then it turns a beige color, and then it falls off, and fruit continues to ripen inside the calyx on the ground underneath the plant. That's why it's called a ground cherry. But it's actually a cousin of a tomato. So husk tomato is a more accurate name. So when I find these plants, and it's starting this time of year, from now until the frost, first thing I do is I look underneath the plants for the ripe fruit that are still in the papery husk. So you see right here is an example of what the fruit looks like. Oh, what did I do?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. So right there is what the fruit looks like after you pull this papery calyx off. This is important because there are poisonous lookalikes to this plant. Like there's a plant, I can't remember what it's called, the common name, but it's a horse nettle, I think is the common name, and it's a plant with yellow tomato-like fruits, and it's thorny thing, and the leaves look kind of like oak leaves. It's a very common farm weed, and it's poisonous, tastes bad, so I'm not worried about you eating it by mistake. But anyway, to avoid disappointment, only harvest the yellow fruit that looks like, that you can't see it until you pull the husk off. That's the secret for the ground cherries. And then it tastes like a sweet cherry tomato. They're really fun. Okay, so evening primrose is something we saw a lot of at DAcres. And this is the main edible stage when the plant's at the first year level, when you have just a rosette of leaves like this. And if you yank that up, you're going to get a root that looks like that. And you just, my favorite way to use that root is to grate it up and make pancakes with it, like potato pancakes. So use whatever potato pancake recipe you have and just use an equivalent amount of the evening primrose root instead of potato. It should come out great. Okay, burdocks edible. I saw that today, but I didn't teach it to people. It's also a biennial, so you want to get the root the first year, or the very beginning of the second year, which is what this plant is. And the roots, though, it's not like evening primrose or a carrot. You can't grab the foliage and yank on it and get the root up that way. It will break on you, so you have to dig them out, which is a lot of work, and I don't usually bother. So instead, I'm harvesting this part of the plant, the developing flower stalk. So this is in the first couple weeks of June in the Boston area, so add a week to that for up here. And I just, so that took about 20 minutes worth of gathering, so much faster than digging. And so I peel these stalks and I chop them up and then I boil them for about 5 minutes. And the flavor is very similar to an artichoke, because burdock and artichokes are related. And so this is good just plain or thrown into spaghetti sauce, so it's really good in the recipe where ordinarily you take artichoke hearts and Parmesan cheese and mayonnaise and breadcrumbs and you mix it all together. And you bake it in the oven. It's a spread you put on crackers. Where you can substitute the boiled burdock flower stalk rounds for the artichoke hearts in that recipe, and it works out great. That's what that recipe is. And that recipe is on my webpage. So I forgot I had a handout for you all. So when we're done tonight, I'll give you all a handout. At the bottom of that handout is a link to where to find me on the internet and where you can get all those recipes and stuff. Okay, here's catbrier. So I didn't see this plant here, but in southern New England, it's very common. Some people would say it's exceedingly common, and people say all kinds of nasty things about it. But it is a native species, so you know it's part of our ecosystem, whether we like it or not. It is edible. And the edible part are the tender growing tips at the end of the woody vines in the spring, and they're nice and soft. Even the thorns are very pliable. You just pop it in your mouth, and you don't have to cook it. It has kind of a lemony flavor. But here's a plant I like even more, same genus. So this is carrion flower. And I'll tell you why it has that name in a second. But anyway, this is the edible stage like this, when it looks like asparagus. The plant's actually related to asparagus. You harvest it like asparagus, you cook it like asparagus, you eat it like asparagus, it tastes like asparagus. It's related to asparagus. So anyway, so we're out camping and we've steamed up some carrion flower. We're going to fold it into an omelet, and we're using a Frisbee as a plate here. Okay, so why is the plant called carrion flower? It's because if you look right here, you see these developing little flower buds, and if I let those go for about a week longer, they started to bloom, they would smell like dirty gym socks or rotting meat. So that's why it's called carrion flower. So plants are kind of repulsive to interact with then, but if you harvest them before they bloom, they're very yummy. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about mushrooms later in the show, because this show is organized chronologically, and so there are a couple good mushrooms to look for in the spring, and the morel is one of them. So this is the black morel, which I tend not to find so much like way out in the woods somewhere, but right around people's houses, like in the pea stone gravel by the foundation of the house, or by the foundation plantings by the house, or by the walkway in the house, something like that. So all these mushrooms are collected from one person's yard in Weston a number of years ago. They're not there anymore, unfortunately. They used up their substrate and they're gone. But anyway, that's what you can find, just in one spot. Okay, so now the yellow morels are the kind that you find under old apple trees or recently dead elm trees before the bark is sloughed off. When it's died, within a year, that's when the morels show up. And this is also from one person's yard. And so those are good. So whether it's the black morel or the yellow morel, they're both very good.
Under dead apple trees, or what did you say? Elm trees?
Dead elm trees. The apple trees don't have to be dead. They can be alive. Okay, so now here's a plant I'm going to get on a bit of a soapbox about a little bit. So this is the wild leek or the ramp. And this is a plant that you don't see that much here, but as you move further west to western slopes of the White Mountains and into Vermont, where the soil is a little bit more neutral, is where you see it. So down in the Berkshires we have some, and a little bit in south central Mass going into northeastern Rhode Island and stuff. And so this is a native species. It loves the same habitat as our spring ephemeral wildflowers, the trilliums and the bloodroots and stuff like that. And, you know, a little bit of harvesting happened for, you know, many, many years. Country people knew about it. And if you're out like trout fishing or turkey hunting, you might gather some wild leeks and take them home just to supplement what you're doing. All that was fine. But about 7 or 8 years ago, the chefs started hyperventilating about these plants, and they got everybody excited about them. What has happened is there's this gold rush going on in the woods, and people see a patch of leeks like that. People see a patch like that, and they'll nuke them. They'll dig up every single plant and completely wipe out the patch. So there are places in the Berkshires where I used to see these wild leeks and ramps where they're gone. They've been completely extirpated. And these are not people picking for themselves or, you know, to have a couple friends over. These are people that are converting plants to cash. And so this is what I see. I get a little worried when I see, you know, the monetization and commodification of wild plants for, you know, in a very short-sighted way. So that's what I'm worried about with the ramps. But the fact is you do not have to dig up a ramp to eat it. So I'll talk to you about that. So there is a close-up of what the plants look like. So each plant has 2 leaves, sometimes 3 leaves, and the leaves are delicious. And you don't have to dig up a plant. What my recommended harvesting method is pick 1 leaf per plant, leave the remaining leaves attached to the bulb, leave the bulb in the ground, and that's a totally sustainable level of harvest. And then the patch will be there in the future for you and other people to enjoy. You're not disturbing the soil, because the other problem when you dig them up is you're creating this bare soil, which is the ideal growing medium for the garlic mustard and the other invasive species to come in and get a toehold in these rich ephemeral woods where the wild leeks like to grow. So if you know people that are gathering ramps, or, you know, for themselves or for chefs, please share this no-dig harvesting suggested method for them. I don't want to say never dig up a ramp ever, because I have seen large patches now. But just if you tend to confine most, if not all, your harvesting to leaves only, it's much less likely that you cause any harm to the plants. Okay, so this is the kind of thing I see going on, you know, where they're not even eating the bulbs, they're just pickling them and like selling them, and they're not particularly yummy. It's just ramps have cachet, you know, they have sex appeal. It's like ramp, and you know and you take just regular people, including I'm sure some people in this audience, that will go to like a local food co-op, which is where I took that picture over in the right, and they'll see the sign saying locally gathered ramps. Local, aren't I supposed to be buying local food? Isn't local good? And so they're buying these plants that were unsustainably harvested, and it's not good. So fortunately, I've gotten the word out to the you know, people. I am seeing some little change in awareness about this. So let me give you an example. So last year, I get this email at my job, and the subject line is wild ramps. And I thought, oh great, some hyperventilating foodie wants me to tell them where my favorite ramp patch they can go and nuke it. So I opened up the email, and it was actually the produce manager for the Hungry Mountain Food Co-op in Montpelier, Vermont, and he said that they wanted to only sell leaves, no whole plants, no bulbs, only leaves at the food co-op, and they wanted to put in a quote from me in each bag to explain why that was a good idea. He said, thank you for doing that. Okay, now you can propagate ramps. So the New England Wildflower Society, where many people in the audience belong to this group, they are growing them down at Garden of the Woods in Framingham, Mass. And they have stock beds where they're reproducing them vegetatively, and they take a certain percentage off every year, and they sell them to people. And once you get them growing in your yard, you know, you can harvest them any way you want. But I bet you don't dig them up, because that would be like killing the goose that laid the golden egg. You know, you're just picking the leaves, and then the plants will be there year after year, and you can keep enjoying them. Okay, so here's Clintonia. We did see this one today. So this is more typical of New Hampshire, where your soil tends to be more acidic. So this is also called corn lily, blue bead lily. Relatively common plant here. Looks a lot like the ramp, but I'll explain in a second why it's different. But anyway, these plants are a little bit too old to eat, but when the spring, when they're yummier, when the leaves are shorter, like about 2 or 3 inches long, so this is sort of mid-May in this part of New Hampshire, the leaves taste just like the outside of a cucumber, and they're quite nice. but by this time of year, they're not going to taste good. Okay, so this likes the acid soil, the wild leeks like the neutral soil. So I almost never see them together, but here's a photo I took from the western slope of the White Mountains that had just enough of the neutral influence that the clintonia and the wild leek grew together. So here's the clintonia over here. Here's the wild leek over here. You see they look really similar, but if you rub this leaf, it smells like cucumber. You rub this leaf, it smells like onion or garlic. And then you know right away what the difference is. Okay, dwarf ginseng, I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to skip spring beauty. Okay, black locust. This is a plant we saw on the property here today. This is considered an invasive species in Massachusetts, another guilt-free foraging opportunity, but even in places where it isn't categorized as that, picking the flowers off this plant isn't in any way harming it. So, and you see there's a pollinator on the flowers. He can go and pollinate all the stuff that I can't reach. You know, these are trees that are like 30, 40, 50 feet tall. The bumblebees and all the pollinators can have those flowers, but the ones that I can reach, I want to share those. And these flowers are great straight off the tree. They smell and taste like jasmine, so you can stuff your face right by the tree. Or my favorite way to use these is to make fritters from them. And so that recipe's in my book. And so you just pick the flowers off the central stems and throw them into the fritter batter. And there's your black locust fritters. They're really good. It's the kind of thing you can serve to company for brunch, and they'll be blown away with how good they are. Okay, so here's pokeweed. And pokeweed's not edible now. You know, the mature foliage and the berries and the flowers, none of that's edible. It's only edible in the spring when it first comes up, and then it will have shoots when they're like 6 to 10 inches tall. And the key thing is, how do you know a pokeweed shoot is a pokeweed shoot? Because a shoot is kind of a nondescript thing. Well, what pokeweed does is the stem from the previous year's plant will be retained in the environment, kind of like a ghost or a skeleton. And so here it is right here. Here's last year's pokeweed plant, and the new shoots are coming up in the exact same spot in the ground where the last year's stalk is still there. And so it helps you know that it's pokeweed plant. What's that?
The daylilies do that, yeah.
Daylilies do that.
I just pulled all my...
Oh, okay, very good. Okay, so that's a close-up of a pokeweed shoot. So the combination of this and the dried stalk from last year's plant, then you know I've got pokeweed. Now this is a plant you have to boil it to eat it, to make it safe. So I'm boiling it for 7 minutes, and then it's safe, and it won't shrink or get mushy on you even after all that boiling. So same thing goes for milkweed. There's a chapter on milkweed in my foraging book. Milkweed buds are one of the parts you can eat. Boil it for 7 minutes. And these have been boiled for 7 minutes, and look how well they've held up. You can hardly tell they've been cooked. So, in this recipe, milkweed egg puff is in my book. It's a good way to use the buds. The young pods are edible when they're about 1 inch long and nice and firm to the touch, so not springy or spongy. The flavor is almost indistinguishable from green beans. Okay, but I've got a monarch caterpillar here just to remind us all. This is the plant that monarch butterflies lay their eggs on, and the caterpillars eat the leaves and so on. And so we want to be very respectful of milkweed populations and make sure there's a lot of the plants around so the monarchs aren't losing any habitat. And so what I will do, so if you really, you know, couldn't live with yourself, if you did anything that could ever take any food away from a monarch, ever, if you're just harvesting the young pods, they play no role in the butterfly's life cycle. So you can do that with a clear conscience. But what I do is a kind of a karmic payback to the monarchs is in the fall, when I find some of those pods split open with the seeds on the parachutes and stuff, I see a nice healthy patch of it, I'll gather some from there and take them away, and if I see like an old field that doesn't have any milkweed, I'll release the parachutes there in that place and get a new patch going. Okay. Alright, sassafras is edible. This is a plant from southern New England. There's a chapter in my book. It has leaves with 3 different shapes, no thumbs, 1 thumb, and 2 thumbs, all in the same plant. Very easy to recognize. The sassafras root bark has that familiar root beer flavor. And one thing you can do is make candy from it, and I have a recipe in my book. We're using the shredded root bark right in the candy. It's very good. And the young sassafras leaves are what are used to make filet powder. So if you've ever heard of filet powder, that's what it is made from. Young, dried, powdered sassafras leaves. So you can make your own when the leaves are about 1 inch long. Okay, bayberry is edible. I'm featuring the berries in that photo there, but it's really the leaves that are edible. And you can use them instead of bay leaves. And if you're using them fresh, they soften right up in the soup, whatever you're making, so you don't have to worry about fishing them out at the end. Okay, this one we saw today, Monarda, native species. The name is Oswego tea, but it's really a savory flavor. It's not really a flavor that I think would be good in tea. It's more like thyme or sage. It's more like you use it for like a pizza topping or sausage making or stuffing, something like that. It would be better that way. Yes? You don't have a question? Okay. All right. Lamb's quarters. We saw this today. Really common farm and garden weed. And if you look at this white dust in the center, that's not from the roadside. That's just a natural mealy dust the plant presents. It's related to spinach. It has more vitamins than spinach. You can steam it. You don't have to boil it. It's very good. It's good in the spanakopita I mentioned before, the green spinach pie with the phyllo dough and the feta cheese. So enjoy it that way. Cattails are edible. There's a whole chapter in my book about cattails, so I'm not going to talk about it now. Cattail heart right there is edible. Cattail pollen is edible. You process it just to get out any twigs or bugs, whatever, and then you add it to flour to make these beautiful and nutritious cattail pollen baked products. All right, here's wild rice, and wild rice does grow wild in New England, but I've never processed it myself because it is a lot of work. So I buy my wild rice from the Ojibwe Indians that are gathering it in the traditional way in the lakes in northern Minnesota. But if you wanted to, you could do it here in New England because we have it here in New England. Okay, and this is arrowhead or rapedo. So has anybody seen or read the book The Hunger Games? And you know the plant Katniss, that whatever her name, the star of that show, is named after this plant? It's this plant, the arrowhead, right here. Now supposedly her father taught her this plant because he said something like, if you're ever hungry, you can find these tubers and eat them. It's not true. They're only available in the off-season. They're only available from like October to May. So if you're hungry in the summer, you have to find something else to eat because the tubers won't be out there. Okay, so this plant we saw today, actually we saw the native counterpart to this, the Tilia americana, the basswood, but this is the Tilia cordata. The young leaves are edible, and the flowers, you make tea from it, and the flowers taste good. The tea that you make from the flowers tastes good. It also has 2 medicinal values. It's soothing to your digestive system and your mental state at the same time. It's a very nice plant.
Is that a tree?
It is a tree, yes. Okay, and here's another tree, or a small tree. This is the Juneberry. So the blossoms come out in April with the shadow running in the rivers, and then that's what the fruit looks like. And it tastes like a cross between a cherry and an almond, even though it looks like a blueberry. And those are great for stuffing your face right by the tree. There's a lot of the property here, but it's too late to find the right fruit now. This is a very early summer foraging opportunity. And so you can make stuff with the Juneberries and mulberries. There's mulberries on the property here. Go down to southern New England. It's a very common tree, especially in urban areas. It doesn't mind the pavement at all. And so I like to make strudel, and Juneberries and mulberries make very good strudel, as does beach plum. We'll talk about them in a second when we get to them. So there's edible currants and gooseberries that you find in the wild and stuff. So this photo is from northern Maine. So this is a plant that can definitely is not affected by cold. And I see it in southern New England too. So that's one. Here's another one that I found along the Maine coast. So they're both edible and yummy. And they're tart, but they're good, you know, if you want to make preserves for them and you're adding sugar anyway, then it doesn't matter if they're tart. Purslane, we saw this today. So this is a very common summer garden weed. It's edible raw or cooked. It's high in iron and omega-3 fatty acids, so it's good for you. And now I'm going to teach you a cool way to use purslane that requires no cooking skill whatsoever, and that is to put it in gazpacho, and you don't even have to make the gazpacho. You can go to the store and buy the gazpacho, just throw the purslane leaves in the gazpacho, and the texture of the purslane leaves works really well in the gazpacho.
What do they taste like?
Purslane, they're succulent, they're slightly mucilaginous or gummy, but in this kind of recipe they work really well. They're mild, they're slightly tart. Okay, daylilies, somebody mentioned daylilies, and the daylily tubers, the crowns, the daylily buds, the daylily flowers, and that's what's here, the daylily buds being sauteed in a little butter right over here. And the wilted flowers are all edible, but the caution part is because for a small segment of the population, there's something in daylilies that might not agree with your digestive system. And so if you eat the daylilies, you might find that you feel a little nauseous or you have a loose bowel movement afterwards. You get better right away. You're not going to have flashbacks later on. You just know that daylilies don't agree with your digestive system. It's less than 20% of the population, but I just want to let you know in case you're one of those people, so you know.
Now, daylilies and tiger lilies are two different things.
They are, yes.
So you can't eat tiger
Yeah.
lilies. Then.
Well, I'm not sure about that. The daylilies I recommend because they're common and they're relatively
They're the
wild.
more orange ones, right? Without.
Right. The way I recognize daylilies is that the leaves, I'm sorry, I don't have any leaves showing you in this plant, but the leaves fold in half as they go down into the base of the plant. So that distinguishes them from a lot of the other things that look like them. Okay, flowering raspberry, we saw this one today. This is a good native species that you can plant if you'd like to have some raspberries because it has these pretty flowers, it has these large maple-like leaves, it has no thorns, so that's another good thing about it. And that's what the fruit looks like. It's not the yummiest fruit in the Rubus genus, but it's a native species. It does grow up here, so it's a fun one to look at. Okay, here's black raspberry, and that's what the fruit looks like in July when it's ripe. And here's a tip that you might not know. Black raspberry is most easiest to recognize in the middle of the winter when the canes have this purplish color to them. And you can see them when you're out like cross-country skiing or whatever at a great distance. So you can spot them like way over the other side of the school ball field on the edge. So I often find really good black raspberry picking opportunities in the off-season. And I remember where those spots are, and then I go get the fruit when it's in season. Okay, here's a plant that you need to be further north in New England or further like down East Maine in a boggy area. This is another member of the Rubus genus called a bake appleberry. And if you go like into the Canadian Maritimes, you run into an increasingly amount. Like they sell along the roadside in Newfoundland. And the color is a little bit more orange sometimes. And it looks like it's a single fruit with a pair of leaves, and each fruit tastes like a baked apple. So they're really fun. That's a more of a boreal species as you get further north. Okay, and this is an invasive species. This is wineberry, and this you're going to encounter as you move further south. So in southern New England, down into lower Hudson Valley, Long Island, Pennsylvania is where you really start to hit a lot of the wineberry. Totally guilt-free foraging opportunity. It's a non-native species. You pick all you want. And it's a really pretty fruit. I think raspberries taste better, but the wineberries really sparkle in the sun. They have a slight stickiness to the touch when you pick them. And they hold up really well to freezing and using later. So here's a flan that was made with frozen berries many months after we picked the berries. So, all right, jewelweed, we talked about this one this time, today, found it here at DAcres. And the edible part are the seeds, and the seeds are enclosed in exploding seed pods. So right in there are the ripe seeds. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what you want to look for. So there's the ripe seed pod. And if you just grab it and explode in your hand, that's what it's going to look like. And these are the ripe seeds, and if you eat them, they taste just like walnuts. And another cool thing to do, you don't need to do this to eat them, but if you gently slide the outer seed covering off, the inner color is this bright robin's egg blue color. And I have no idea why that color is inside there. No creatures ever see it. It's just one of those unexplained mysteries of Mother Nature. So that's the jewelweed. And this is in season right now. So we've finally gotten to the part of the show where we are right now.
Across those before when you're kids.
Yeah, okay, fire cherry, this should have been earlier in the show. This is more of our earlier summer, but this variety I find here in New Hampshire. Black cherries, there are black cherries in the property here, but I didn't see any fruit on them. But a couple weeks ago in Massachusetts, there was a lot of black cherries like this. And the flavor varies quite a bit from tree to tree. Sometimes they're puckery and astringent, not very good at all. And sometimes they can be really sweet and just about as good as a cultivated cherry, except for the fact there's no getting around the fact that they're small. So a good-sized black cherry is going to approach but not quite get to a ½ an inch in diameter. And the pits inside each fruit aren't that much smaller than conventional cherry pits. So I wouldn't recommend using black cherries for any recipe that required pitting each individual fruit, because that would be extremely tiresome. So I just eat them right off the tree, or I'll, just simmer the fruit in some water for a while just to soften it up, and then put it through a fruit mill.
It's mostly seed.
Right. Okay, here's choke cherry. This one I find a lot in northern New England. And it's called choke cherry just because the fruit is very puckery. This is one that I don't think is ever really good. Maybe if you're a 10-year-old boy, you'd like it. But most other people, it's like, yeah, that's too puckery for me. But it makes a very good jelly. And the flavor, that puckery flavor, stands up to the jelly making process and makes a much more interesting final product. Okay, so here is the black huckleberry. So this one is pretty much all over New England and actually further north into the Canadian Maritimes and stuff. And then there's also the blue huckleberry.
I thought those were blueberries.
No, this is a blue huckleberry, and these are ripe actually after all the blueberries are gone. So I was just in Rhode Island a few days ago, and we were still finding ripe blue huckleberries down there when the blueberries have been finished for at least a month. Okay, so here's a plant we saw today. This is an elderberry, and this is another one I have to get on my soapbox a little bit because I've heard a lot of hyperventilating amongst the foodies and the chefs about this one too. This is another native species. It is a relatively common plant, but they seem to be fixated on this elder flowers. They want to make drinks from it, like alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. And I have the next slide. I'm going to show that, but I'm afraid a beetle is going to pop up and block the view because these slides, I have them sequenced, but they seem to be skipping through the sequences now. So I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. You're going to see a beetle probably in the next slide that's going to cover up the other photo. And the beetle is part of the story. But anyway, if you pick these flowers off the plants, you're not going to get any fruit. The flowers have to stay on the plants to get the fruit. So, plus you pick the flowers off, no flowers left for pollinators and stuff. Now, once again, I'm not worried about people picking a few for themselves to have, serve at home. It's just when, like one chef puts it on the menu, and some other chef says, hey, he's selling those elderflower. I got to have that on my menu. And then you have monkey see, monkey do in the restaurant world, and suddenly everybody's got it on the menu. And once again, you see this gold rush mentality where the landscape's being cleaned out of elderflowers because everybody's got to have it. And, people are making money purchasing elderflowers. So that's what I don't want to see. So if I run into a chef or a store that says, I have to have these, I'd say, fine, get a farmer to grow them for you because they grow very quickly. A lot of farms have wetlands on the edge of the farm where they can't be plowing and growing regular crops anyway. Plant it all up with elderberries. And if you want to sell those all to a chef or a restaurant, then you're not hammering the wild populations. And then I guess I can live with that. Okay, well that's what happened. So underneath this photo, there's actually pictures of products that are made with elderberry. There's a non-alcoholic drink and not alcoholic drink. Doesn't really matter. But this cool-looking critter here is an elderberry borer beetle. The only place it lives on Earth is inside the stems of the elderberry plants. And so by picking all the flowers off the plants, the people that are overzealously picking, they're not killing the beetles directly, but if we began to prevent the plants from reproducing because we were preventing them from producing berries, and we started losing them in the environment, this beetle would be harmed too. So that's the thing about native species. It's often connections that you're not aware about. So that's why I'm encouraging being very, using a lot of forbearance in harvesting the natives. And if you want to just pick, in a very joyous, guilt-free way, go for the weeds and invasive species. Okay, so that's what the elder fruit looks like right now on the property right now, just outside here. And so, and that photo isn't upside down. That's what the berry clusters do from the weight of the fruit is they hang upside down like that. Elderberries aren't good to eat raw right off the plant. You can get a stomachache if you eat a lot of them. But if you dry them first or cook them first, they're safe to eat in whatever quantity you want. Okay, so Indian cucumber, this is a plant we saw today. There's quite a lot of it here, but this is a plant that you also have to use a lot of forbearance about because to get the edible part, which is, that's my wife Ellen, by the way, and she's, so this photo we took in New Hampshire. Right there is the edible part. These starchy roots taste like starchy cucumber, and they're really yummy. So a couple people on my walk nibbled on them today, and they all thought they were good. But you are killing an individual plant to do that. So we checked and made sure we were seeing a lot of plants in the spot where we gathered some before we dug any up. And I encourage you to do that. So make sure, in fact, you could do what the Native Americans did, as they were looking for a particular plant out in the environment to harvest. If they would see a patch of it, they wouldn't pick from the first patch. They'd make an offering, like a little package of tobacco or something like that, leave that at the first patch, and then they'd keep going and they'd harvest from the second or the third patch that they find as a way of making sure the plants are able to continue to thrive in the natural environment. So please, this is actually, if I were going to say a place on Earth where I saw a lot of Indian cucumber plants, it's actually New Hampshire. So you do have a lot of this plant, but just make sure you're seeing a lot. Make sure you leave a lot after you dig up any, so the plants are able to continue to thrive where they're, because you wouldn't want to pick so much from a patch that patch died out. That would be really bad. Okay, so that's one issue, is this plant, you need to be use a lot of forbearance when you're harvesting it. There's another problem. There is a protected plant, a rare orchid, that you could mix up with this plant. So here it is, the small world begonia. So this is a federally listed species, so you absolutely don't want to pick this plant or you get hauled away in handcuffs. Okay, so now the botanical name for Indian cucumber is Mediola virginiana. The botanical name for this one is Isotria medioides, which means looks like Indian cucumber. Okay, so how do you tell them apart? It's this part that looks similar, this whorl of leaves like that. If you go back to the Indian cucumber, you see the larger plants have this double-decker thing going on, where you have a whorl like that, and then another section of stem, and a second whorl of leaves where the flowers and the berries form. So if you're only harvesting the double-decker Indian cucumber plants like that, you'll never pick the rare orchid by mistake. And the double-decker plants have the bigger root end.
What if you did one with steak and ate it? Would you get sick?
The orchid root? Oh, well,
So yeah.
I don't, I can't tell. Let's just say that, you know, a worse fate might be befalling you than just from momentary sickness. You know, you might get into serious legal trouble. So yeah, leave this one alone. Okay, so sweet fern, you can make the tea from the leaves. And the colonists did that, the Revolutionary War era. Same thing with sweet goldenrod. It's the one goldenrod we have. I know if it's edible. The flavor is like anise. Spice bush, we saw this today. It's at this stage down in southern New England right now with the red berries, which I dry and I use as a savory spice. But these berries are important food for migratory songbirds because they're high in lipids and calories, and so they're using them to fuel their migrations. So I'm making sure to leave plenty of berries on the plants so the songbirds have all they need. Okay, and this is another reason why spice bush is a cool plant, because it's the host for this spice bush swallowtail caterpillar, and there's the butterflies. So if you don't have spice bush in your property, they planted one here at DAcres, so we know that it grows well up here. So, you know, if you have a nice sheltered microclimate, you could get it to grow. Okay, here's wintergreen. We saw that today. The whole plant has the oil of wintergreen flavor in it, so you can make tea from the leaves. Here's the berries. The berries aren't very sugary, but they do have that wintergreen flavor. And here's a plant that I find in northern New Hampshire that's really fun. This is the creeping snowberry. And I'm sorry if you can't see very well, but the berries on here are the same size, shape, and flavor, wintergreen flavored Tic Tacs. So it's like eating candy right off the vine. So it's really fun. And you should still be able to find a few of those around. If you're hiking at a certain elevation where you run into these plants, I hope you find some. And so this plant grows in Massachusetts, but it's much less common than it is up here. So you're lucky you have it. Okay, and here's black birch, and yellow birch has the same flavor, and you can also make wintergreen flavored tea from this one. And the way you do it is you just take the twigs and you peel them, and take the peeled twigs and the peelings and stick them in some mason jars and just basically leave them around for a few hours, and you will get this nice wintergreen flavored beverage, which I just chill it and drink it that way. It's very easy to make. And you can tap any species of birch and collect sap like a maple tree and boil it down, and it doesn't have the oil of wintergreen flavor at all. It looks and tastes just like molasses, which is what's going on over here, but the ratio is more like 100 to 1 instead of 40 to 1. So it doesn't make sense if you're just trying to get molasses. I'd say just go to the store and find molasses. So, okay, hog peanut is a native species. We didn't see it today, but it's a pretty common plant. And it's a member of the pea family, and it produces these little food storage devices underneath the ground, which are edible raw or cooked, and they're small, and so this isn't one where you're going to get a huge amount of food in a short amount of time. But if you're out camping and you've got nothing better to do, you could get about a cup of these in about an hour of picking.
So, Russ, are those root tubers? Or are they growing from someplace? Are they related to the flowers?
No, they're not related to the flowers. This is
so attached to the roots, the way
yes.
that the apios was earlier.
Right. Yes. Yep. Yep. Okay, so this is a beach plum, and there is a beach plum here. We saw a couple of beach plums on it today, but where you're usually going to see beach plums is along the beach. And so Plum Island, have you ever heard of Plum Island off the coast of Massachusetts?
We live next
should
to
be
it.
called Beach Plum Island, because that's why it was named Plum Island, because the beach plums there. And you are allowed to pick beach plums there. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you fill out this free permit, and I think you're allowed to pick a quart a day or something like that. So anyway, that's what it looks like when it's blooming. This is what it looks like when the fruit is on it. So it's still like this. So if you have a chance in the next week or so, if you're going to go anywhere near the coast from like Portsmouth, New Hampshire, further down, this is something to look for. Okay, but it doesn't have to grow along the coast. I know places inland where the plants grow too. Beach pea, this does grow along the coast. If you're growing garden peas, I don't think beach peas are quite as good, but you can eat them. So there's my wife Ellen shelling the beach peas. As I say, I think that garden peas are better, but if you're at the beach anyway, I think it's funner to be harvesting beach peas than just sitting around in a towel getting skin cancer. So Orac, this is a wild cousin of lamb's quarters that grows right along the ocean just beyond the rack line. It is edible raw, but it's really good cooked. You don't have to boil it, you can just steam it. Very yummy vegetable. This is sea rocket, which is sort of the equivalent of the wasabi paste that you have with sushi. It's really strong flavor. It is a mustard, and so a very little bit goes a long way. There's no reason to uproot these plants. Just pick a few leaves off and leave them there so they can continue to exist at the beach. Here's glasswort or salicornia. Same thing, just pick the tender tips off the plants, leave the plants there so they can continue to grow where they are. Dulse, which is one of the edible seaweeds. This one, the texture is better when you let the dulse dry, and it still is very pliable. It has a nice briny flavor, so it's very versatile in lots of different recipes. And in a restaurant, Grand Manan Island, they put the dulse chips out, just like the tortilla chips at a Mexican restaurant. So that was fun. Irish moss is what carrageen is from. It's an emulsifier, it thickens food. And so at a party that I helped out at Martha's Vineyard a few years back, here's a woman that made this blancmange from Irish moss. It's a pudding, where you extract the gelatinous material out of the Irish moss to do that. Okay, here's an invasive seaweed called codium or green fleece or dead man's fingers. And this one, I'm trying to get the chefs excited about. I want them to pick this one. I want them to put it on the menu because the more that this is removed from the natural environment, the better the natural environment is. And so they make kimchi from it in Korea. It's from Asia. So I'm doing a program on the vineyard next month, and I want to organize this codium cook-off and have all the chefs, try to experiment with it and see what cool recipes they can come up with it. Because once again, I say this is one of those few circumstances where if a food gets really hot and everybody's going to have it in the menu, that would be a good thing in terms of the environment of this codium plant. Okay, wild roses are edible. Actually, any roses are edible, the flowers or the hips. And the hip is just the fruit of any rose, wild or domesticated, so you can make rose petal jam or jelly, rose hip jam or jelly, rose hip tea, and so on. This is wild raisins, so this grows in New Hampshire. Fruit's edible. Actually, lots of viburnums are edible, so here's the nannyberry, which is on the property here with edible fruit. Here's the hobblebush or moosewood, and when the berries turn this black color is when they're edible. And moosewood can also be beautiful, so another good choice. Okay, I finally got to the mushrooms in the show. So how am I doing time-wise? Is it okay if I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just checking, making sure. Okay, all right, so now I want to give you the bad news first. All right. The risk of picking and eating a wild mushroom and getting very sick or possibly even dying is significant. Because we do have about a dozen species out there that are potentially lethal, and there's absolutely no indication from the flavor whatsoever that you're eating something that could harm you. And so you could have this delicious mushroom meal one day and be dead several days later from liver or kidney failure. Okay.
Awesome.
Now, having said that, you can arrange all the mushroom species there are in a line and cluster to one end of those species that are virtually impossible to confuse with anything poisonous, versus those at the other end of the line that even experts can't tell apart. And as long as you stay at the safe end of the line and you gradually work your way out, you gain experience and confidence. That's how you stay out of trouble. All right? Does everybody get that? Okay, good. So after the show tonight, I have some real live mushrooms downstairs Some of which are at the safe end of the line. Some are more in the intermediate category. But at least I can teach you a few very, very safe ones, and you can feel confident that you can pick those and not worry about those. And a couple of those are in my show right here. So one of them that's downstairs that we're going to talk about right now, this is called the sulfur shelf mushroom, or some people call it the chicken mushroom or chicken of the woods mushroom. And that's because if you slice into this mushroom and you pull it apart, the meat of the mushroom just looks like the white breast meat of a chicken. Okay, and you can use it as a substitute for chicken in recipes where you ordinarily use chicken. So you can make sulfur shelf fajitas, sulfur shelf paprikash, sulfur shelf tetrazzini. It's good all those ways, especially if it's a nice young specimen. So what I'll do on a sulfur shelf is I just trim off this outer part here. And if you're slicing it and it slices very easily like butter, that's great. If you have to kind of hack away at it, it's going to be increasingly indigestible. So I recommend just harvesting the young parts of the young mushrooms are the best one. So this is way at the safe end of the line. There is a look-alike to this mushroom, but it's an edible look-alike. It's this form right here, which is actually a slightly different species, which tends to be pink and white rather than pumpkin orange and yellow, which is the last one I showed you, which we'll see downstairs. But this one's equally edible. So this is called Labiporus cincinnatus. Yes?
Do you want to talk about the life cycle of these guys and the ethics of collecting the mushrooms?
All right, well...
Just real quick.
Sure, because mushrooms are analogous to, they're fruiting bodies, fungal fruiting bodies, and so they're analogous to apples on an apple tree. And so usually harvesting the fruiting body isn't harming the organism, because the organism is the mycelium, it's the white thread-like mass that's living in the rotting log or in the soil, whatever it's getting its food source from. So picking the fruiting bodies usually doesn't harm the organism. In fact, some studies have been done on some species, mushroom species like chanterelles, where they looked at a control patch where they left them alone, they looked at another patch which was harvested heavily, and they saw the harvested heavily patch actually produced more mushrooms than the one that was left alone because the mycelia got the signal that the fruiting bodies weren't there anymore, so it produced more. So, but that's limited info for that species only. You can't extrapolate that to all mushroom species. But in general, I don't worry too much about harvesting mushrooms as far as environmental impacts, especially when there's other ones around and I'm just taking my share. And, So typically in the field, when I'm seeing a sulfur shelf mushroom, I'll trim off the tender part that I want and leave the rest there.
So the ends of it is what you eat?
Yes. The center part is going to be tough and woody.
Right, so the lighter color.
Okay, so I'm going to show you some chanterelles today. So these were pretty numerous in New Hampshire this summer. And the key things to look for. So this is not at the safe end of the line. This is moving more toward the intermediate area because there are false chanterelles. So, but look at the color. The color is the same as the color of an egg yolk or the center stripe in the middle of the highway. And the color is the same in the cap and the stalk. And right here, you see these fork-like ridges. They're not true gills, and you'll see that on the specimens I have downstairs. And they're what are known as decurrent, as they run down the stalk. And these mushrooms grow singly on the ground. They don't grow in clumps. They don't grow on wood. Okay? So if you remember all that, you can pick the chanterelle mushroom. And if you don't, then this is one that you do the easier ones first, and then you can get to this one later. Okay, so here are chanterelles in the center, and the outside is the lobster mushroom, and this is actually a fungus on a fungus, is you have a white mushroom starting to grow, and then this mold, this cooked lobster-colored mold, colonizes the white mushroom, and it converts what is an inedible mushroom into an edible mushroom. So that's the lobster mushroom. Okay, so the French call these mushrooms trompettes de mort, which means trumpets of death. But they're actually a totally safe mushroom with no poisonous effects. This is the black trumpet chanterelle. And these are quite common in New Hampshire. I found some today. We will see some downstairs. So this is one you can learn today and feel confident you know it and go out and pick it and not worry. Okay? Because there's no poisonous lookalikes to this. All right? Now this mushroom dries also very well. Some mushrooms you need to cook fresh or they're really not good. These, especially if you get a lot of them and you don't have time to eat them all, is you can dry them and then store them dried in your pantry. They'll keep for years until you're ready to use them. And the drying actually concentrates the flavor. Okay, here's the hygrophorous milky mushroom, one of the edible lactarius mushrooms. And this one's more in the intermediate category because it's a gilled mushroom. This one's at the safe end of the line. We're going to see specimens of this downstairs. This is the hedgehog or the sweet tooth mushroom. And if you look at the underside of the cap, as you'll see downstairs, it has teeth coming down from the top, kind of like the roof of a cave. All these, stalactites hanging down. That's what it looks like. There are no poisonous tooth mushrooms. There are some that don't taste good because they're bitter, but there aren't any that would require any medical attention whatsoever.
And all these mushrooms, can you cook them like regular mushrooms?
Yes. Yeah. On a sulfur-shelf mushroom, you might want to cook it a little bit longer, a little bit, some mushrooms you want to cook quickly in a pan, like for a minute. Those I would cook at a lower temperature a little bit longer, just to make sure they're tenderized. Okay? All right, so that one we'll see downstairs. No, do not eat mushrooms raw. I say that categorically because, number one, the chitins and the other structures of mushroom aren't really digestible raw. Secondly, there are mushrooms that are toxic raw, like morels. Morels are actually toxic raw. You get sick from eating raw morels. So if you cook all mushrooms that you pick, then you don't have to remember which ones are toxic raw and which ones aren't. You can relax in that perspective. And also, it's possible some other pathogens might be hiding out in a mushroom, and if you're cooking the mushrooms first, that's going to also, reduce the likelihood that anything like that is going to mess with you. So I recommend cooking all mushrooms. Sorry about having such a strong reaction to that, but I just want to make sure. Okay, so here's a giant puffball mushroom. The only lookalike to the mushroom in this photo is a volleyball. Any puffball like that is edible as long as it's nice and firm and white in the center, or creamy white. You don't want it to be yellow or green or any other color. And the standard way to cook that mushroom is just slice it into half-inch thick steaks and roll it into a beaten egg and some flavored breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs and fry it in a skillet in some butter for a few minutes and make country fried puffball steak. And that mushroom could easily feed everybody in that photo. These do occur in New England, but I might see them a little bit more frequently if you move further west where the soil is a little bit more limestone based. You might run into them a little more often there. Okay, we found one of these today. This is a porcini mushroom, or a Boletus edulis, one of the most highly sought after species of mushrooms in the world. We have them here in New England, and so they're not just Italian. In German they call them Steinpilz, in French they call them ceps. It's more or less the same thing, the Boletus edulis. So I'm going to teach you how to recognize this one. Okay, first you want to see the color of the top of the cap is the same color as a loaf of baked bread. So they call these penny buns in England. Then you have the spongy layer on the underside of the cap. So right there you can see it. Right here you can see it. On the young specimens, it's white. But in the older specimens, see how it's white here? In the older specimens, this is going to be an olive yellow color. But the key thing to look for in a Boletus edulis is right up here near the top of the stalk is this reticulation. It's this white net-like markings. It's almost like you took a very thin piece of gauze and you wrapped the top of the stalk. And it's white, which is an important characteristic. Okay, so that's a Boletus edulis. But boletes are considered relatively safe on the mushroom, so they're toward the safe end of the line because there are no deadly poisonous boletes. There are a few species that could give you a stomachache, but nothing that would require, any more serious medical attention. Okay, so and here's two I find in the White Mountains that are really good. We found one of these today. This is called the blue-wing bolete, and this color is like straw. And all you have to do is rub your finger on it. If it turns indigo blue instantly. Wow. This is the only mushroom that does that has the straw color and will turn indigo blue instantly. And that's the blue-wing bolete. And ordinarily, the advice for beginning mushroom hunters is don't eat boletes that bruise blue, but this is one of the exceptions. So just make sure you have this straw color, and then you're okay. And we did find one today. And then this is the bay bolete, and this one also bruises blue. If you rub the pores right here, it turns blue right away. But it's also a safe edible. But once again, these are kind of in the intermediate category because the advice for novice mushroom hunters is don't eat the boletes that bruise blue. So like the Boletus edulis, the porcini I showed you earlier, that does not bruise blue. Okay, so there's the blue-wing bolete chopped up. So that's what it does when you chop it up, mixed up with some chanterelles. So that was a pretty photo. Okay, so here's a really cool mushroom. This is a beefsteak mushroom. So I mostly see this in southern New England, but it really looks like a piece of meat hanging on a tree. So all I did was cut it in half and stuck the lower half down here. So you see it has marbling like a piece of meat. When you squeeze it, red juice comes out just like a piece of meat. So the only look-alike to this mushroom is a piece of meat. Okay, so how do you cook it? What does it taste like? Well, it has kind of a tart flavor, but I really like this. This might be my favorite species of mushroom. And what I'll do is just brush it with a little teriyaki sauce and grill it on a hibachi, just like a piece of meat. Okay, so this is a cauliflower mushroom, and this one comes out this time of year. I have seen them in New Hampshire, though I do see them more frequently further south. And it looks like a big mass of egg noodles at the base of a tree. So that photo was taken quite a long time ago, and here's a more recent update on it. Same variety of mushroom here. And see how it looks like a big mass of yellowy egg noodles? They're usually at the base of pine trees, and when you cook it up, it tastes like mushroomy egg noodles. They're really good too. Okay, no poisonous lookalikes to this. They're just, I'll go years without seeing these though. They're not that common. Okay, so this one I thought we were going to find today because we saw the perfect habitat for it. It should be out. I don't know why I didn't see it. This is called the bear's head tooth. It looks like a frozen waterfall hanging on a tree, almost invariably beech trees. There's a lot of beech trees here. So this is one I encourage you to look for. It has no poisonous lookalikes. And it's a tooth mushroom, so it's composed of a lot of little, like, stalactites, like the roof of a cave, hanging down like that. And the texture is very similar to crab meat. And so you can cook it up how you use crab meat, like in an omelet, for example, and it's very good that way.
Are there any issues in cleaning something like that that's so comey? You know,
No, usually if you're finding a fresh young one, it won't have any stuff in it. Okay. All right, so this is probably the most bizarre organism in the show. This is a fungus called corn smut that gets into the developing ears of corn, and it gets into the little kernels and swells them up and turns them gray. And I admit it's not the most appetizing food I've ever seen. But you see I've got a big smile on my face when I found this because I had heard that in Mexico this is considered a delicacy. In fact, during the days of the Aztecs, that if you were a peasant and you found this growing on your corn, you weren't even allowed to touch it. You'd have to send for an emissary to the emperor, and they would take it off to the royal courts, and only royalty could eat it. I thought, okay, it must be good then. So I brought it home, and I cooked it up, standard way you cook a mushroom, a little butter, a little onion, and I took one bite, and it tasted like mud. And I thought, what is the big deal about this stuff? And so then I decided I would try it a little differently, and so I cooked it in the Mexican style with some hot chili peppers, with some poblano chiles, and there's some kind of chemical transformation that happens with the capsaicin in the hot peppers that makes the corn smut yummy. So that was the secret. So it's possible you might still be able to find that now. If you see it in a farmer's field, talk to them first, because there are a few farmers that actually have a relationship with chefs, and they're sending them off to chefs. But most farmers are happy to see this go off their property as quickly as possible. So anyway. Okay, so here's the head of the woods, and someone brought an example of this one in today, so you'll be able to see a live one later. You usually find them at the base of big, old oak trees. And they can get to be more than a foot across. That's not unusual at all. And so all these mushrooms were collected by just a group of people over one day out in the Berkshires. So this is the top of Mount Greylock. Actually, we found them further down. But it's not unusual to see so many hen-of-the-woods mushrooms just in a short space, if the conditions are right. And on a big specimen like this, the center part's not going to be edible, but the outer part will still be tender. But I like to get the hen-of-the-woods mushrooms in the chick stage when they're smaller like this, and then the whole thing is nice and tender. That's my favorite stage.
And that's the proper color?
Yes. They range in color. They can be brownish, beigeish, grayish. You can see them all three colors like that, but I often see them this gray color.
And how do you cook those?
Same as the advice I gave with the sulfur shelf, maybe a little lower temperature, a little bit longer, just to make sure it's nice and tenderized. So this is the grayling mushroom, and this one has a specific relationship with one plant, the haircap moss. It's the only place you see the grayling mushroom. Now there are other mushrooms which will grow in the haircap moss, so make sure it's the grayling. But if you see a mushroom growing anywhere else other than the haircap moss, it's not going to be the grayling, because it has this very species-specific relationship. And these are very small mushrooms, but you can find a lot of them and do stuff with them. Oyster mushrooms are very common, and you see them a lot on maple trees primarily, sometimes on elm trees. And I have to tell this story just for people from the New England Botanical Club, because they're going to appreciate this. So this tree is a Norway maple. And this is an invasive species. The ecologists don't like it at all. And it was growing in a park in Winchester, a very nondescript place. The tree had no function whatsoever. It was just there. It had beautiful growth of oyster mushrooms on it. Somebody tipped me off about this. And for years I used to go and fill up baskets like this with these beautiful oyster mushrooms. And then one year I went, there were no mushrooms. And I looked at the tree, and they had tapped in those little fungicide things into the tree, and they saved the Norway maple. But they got rid of this beautiful oyster mushroom habitat. It's very sad. Okay, so here's Staghoard sumac. I did serve sumac A to the group earlier today. And you make a drink from the berries, you pick them off like that, and you just put these in water and pull them apart in water for a few minutes and put it through any kind of a filter just to get out any stray berries or anything else in there. And then you have sumac A, which you can drink hot or cold, sweetened or unsweetened. That's what it looks like, and it's very tasty, and I like it a lot. No, do not heat the water. Use lukewarm or cold water. If you heat it, it's going to make the tea bitter. So use lukewarm or cold water. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so here's the fox grape. So I served a wild grape sorbet earlier today made from this species of grapes. And they're very plentiful in southern New England. And that's a pretty typical scene, you know, in my car, like the second week of September is a basket of grapes like that. You can make grape cheesecake from it. This is the Riverside grape, which produces edible grapes too, which aren't as yummy, but this is very delicate leaves, and some people like to use this for the stuffed grape leaves recipes. Cranberry bog cranberries, that's what they used to be called craneberries because the flowers look like little cranes. And there's the fruit, of course, you know what that looks like. Then here's the mountain cranberry, which you have in New Hampshire, like a Tom Mount cardigan. This will grow there, and further north you run into it. This is what's called partridge berry in Newfoundland. And so you go up there, and it's ubiquitous in Newfoundland. But we have a fair amount of it once you get above a certain elevation here in New Hampshire. And this is the same thing as the Swedish lingonberry. So, you know, when the Swedes say, oh, we have lingonberries. Well, we have them too. They're just it's a circumboreal species, so it's the same thing. Okay, then high-bush cranberry, which is growing on the property here. It's a viburnum, but it has a very, very similar flavor to the bog cranberry. And these berries will persist on the bushes often into the winter. So I took this slide when I was cross-country skiing. I was finding the high-bush cranberries and making a sauce from them that was very good. Okay, hazelnuts. The time to get hazelnuts is right now. We're on the bushes right now. And there's a beaked hazelnut and a common hazelnut. That's what the common hazelnut looks like on the husk. That's what they look like inside. There's the beaked hazelnut, which you have this strange thing sticking out like a bird's beak, and the nuts in there. And the flavor of the nuts is more or less the same. And, acorns are edible. All species of acorns are edible, but the ones that come from the trees with the rounded lobes of the leaves have lower levels of tannic acid, so they usually require less processing. And you can make wonderful muffins from acorns. Shagbark hickory is my favorite edible wild plant. I'll give you a chance to taste them later when we're done. And so that's a very typical scene in my car with a basket like that in mid to late September into October. And there's the penny for scale. So you'll see what these nuts look like. Last year's nuts, and this part's already turned brown, but you get the idea. That's what it looks like inside. And there's the nut meats once you get them out. And you'll get a chance to taste them soon. Here's a recipe from my book. This is a New England version of pecan pie. It's really good. The recipe's in my book. Here's 3 different cookies that I make from shagbark hickories, and I brought some of the middle kind for you to try. Maybe not enough for everybody in the room, so you have to fight for those. Barberry, we saw a plant that is probably hybridized with another species of barberry growing here on the property. So this is the vulgaris species, Barberus vulgaris. So this is the one that tastes good, the Thunbergii, which is the more hated invasive, doesn't taste good. So that's what the fruit looks like when you're talking about the Truda type, Barberus vulgaris. And so I make a jelly from this, which is really good, which was in that thumbprint cookie I showed you with the hickory. So this jelly right here is a barberry jelly, and it's really good. Okay, so here's black walnut that grows in the property here. So these are going to fall off the tree soon and look like old green tennis balls. And I will give you a handout all about eating black walnuts when we get downstairs, and you get a chance to get a couple good recipes. So that's what you typically see piled up along the side of the road very soon. If you don't know a good place to pick black walnuts, and you're going anywhere near Henniker, New Hampshire, the campus of New England College is filled with black walnut trees, and you just drive through the center of Henniker and just go down any of the side streets, and you'll just see these pile up along the road in October. But when I'm traveling around in Massachusetts and I see somebody's yard with some black walnuts, and I'll go knock on the door and say, "Hi, I see you black walnuts, would you mind if I pick some?" And the typical reaction I get is, "Wait a minute, let me get a wheelbarrow." Because people are eager to get these messy things off their property because they sort of smell, they, they can stain your fingers if you handle them raw and stuff. But, I will process them. You get the outer part off, and this is what it looks like inside, so you get to see these downstairs in a second. And then you can make wonderful things from them, like the black walnut baklava. And this is what I made for you, the black walnut honey squares. You get to try that. Okay, ground up. There's a ton of that here in the property here. And it's a native species. The main edible part are these tubers here. You slice them and fry them in a little vegetable oil to make ground up tubers. Jerusalem artichokes grow in the property here. This is what they look like right now. But the edible part of the tubers, and pretty soon you'll be able to start digging these up. They come in beige or mauve or beige color. They're edible either way. There's the golf ball for scale. Autumn olive blooms in May. This is an invasive species in Massachusetts, so another guilt-free foraging opportunity. There's a close-up of the flowers. The fragrance of the flowers smells amazingly like the Clethra alnifolia, the sweet pepper bush. If you're blindfolded, I'm not sure you can tell the difference, except for the time of the year when they're blooming, because this blooms in May, and sweet pepper bush is a summer flowering species. Okay, that's what the ripe autumn olive fruit looks like, and I make a fruit leather from this, and I'll give you a chance to try that when we get downstairs. So there's a close-up of the berries. Here's what the fruit leather looks like, and you can make wine from autumn olive. All right, here's the last slide in the show. So this photo documents a very successful foraging day I had about 10 years ago around Worcester in Massachusetts. So let me tell you what's in this photo here. So we've got some wild pears down here, some shagbark hickory nuts, a big basket of autumn olives, a lot of the porcini mushrooms. This is an DAcres albensis, or a horse mushroom. It's a cousin of the standard store-bought mushroom. So you're probably wondering what the barbecue grill is doing in the photo. Well, I needed one of those too, and somebody had put one out with their trash, so I just forwarded one out. So, thank you very much. So, are there any questions?
I have one, Russ.
Yes.
There's a new weed that's come up really in our gardens. Quickweed, have you heard of
Yes,
that?
quickly. Gallon soda.
I have not seen any at DAcres.
Right. Aren't they lucky?
Because it's becoming a cover crop in many gardens.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I guess that's a
I have it.
wonderful edible.
It's not wonderful, but it is edible.
Oh, okay.
It's bland. It doesn't have a lot of flavor to it, but it is absolutely edible. And the best stage to harvest it is when it's about 3 or 4 inches tall before it really flowers and gets scraggly. And so if you're harvesting it when it's young, that's the best stage to eat it. And although it is edible raw, it has kind of a coarse texture to it that could, irritate your tongue. So I just steam it or put it in anything else that I'm cooking. So yeah, so let me just go on to one more slide here. So leave it on for just a second, would you? Okay.
All right, if you hit over, Carol. And then the middle.
Okay, let me see if I'm going under the slide. Okay, so this is just my foraging book was mentioned, and I do have a box of them in case you want to get one. It was written for the Essex County Greenbelt Association, which is the land trust that covers Essex County, Massachusetts, which is like one of the closest parts of Massachusetts to New Hampshire, because it's the part where Newburyport is, and going down toward Rockport, Gloucester, Salem, Marblehead, west to Lawrence. It's that county in Massachusetts there. And I published the book. They published my book. I wrote it for them, and the books cost $15, and I just send them all the money because they allow foraging as a permitted activity on all their properties open to the public, which is dozens of properties covering hundreds of acres. And I'm so grateful for that. I just said, keep all the money the book makes and just buy more land with it, create more foraging opportunities. So if you want to buy one, they're $15, and you can buy one if you have cash, or if you have a check, you can write it out to the Essex County Greenbelt Association. But that's where the money goes. And if you don't have cash or check, you can get it online. And the handout that I will give you later will have information on how to do that. Okay. So, other questions? Yes?
Does that cover everything in the slide?
No! No, this is written for Essex County, Massachusetts, so it's not going to cover, for example, the creeping snowberry, or the mountain cranberry, or the other stuff that's up here. You know, no. But a lot of the stuff I covered, like the Juneberry, and the milkweed, and the sumac, and groundnut, a lot of the stuff I talked about today is in the book. Yeah, book covers 42 species. I had at least 70 in the show. So this is more than 150, so I actually only covered half of what's out there. Okay, yes, ma'am.
This young gentleman was mentioning about harvesting or proper way to forage.
Yes.
You did not mention, but I think it's true that, or I've learned it in the many past years, that you should cut off the mushroom at the ground so that you can leave.
Yeah, you know,
Is that yes or no?
I've been, eavesdropping on many conversations in that subject, and there isn't consensus out there amongst scientists or lay people or anybody.
There is not?
No, I don't. No, so there's no proof that just cutting a mushroom is better for the mycelium.
Okay.
You know, what you don't want to do is you don't want to disturb the substrate. For example, out west, we have the same species too, but out west, there's a lot of commercial gathering of a mushroom called the matsutake, which sells for a lot of money over in Japan. And so there are people going out in the woods, and they want to find every little baby mushroom, and so they're raking the substrate. They're not just picking the mushrooms, they're actually clearing the ground, so they find every single one. And it's kind of like clear cutting, because that is altering the soil moisture and the substrate and stuff. And so it is very likely the mushrooms aren't going to come back in that patch.
Right.
So you don't want to do that. But if you're just extracting individual organisms and not really disturbing the mycelium, it evolved expecting animals to do that anyway. One of the reasons mushrooms are edible is for different creatures as well as ourselves is because they're hoping that that's one way the spores will spread, other than by wind, is by somebody carrying it off and, pooping it out and getting it to grow in a new place. Let's start with the first summer mushroom I covered in the show, which is this the sulfur shell.
Maybe we'll meet up the
And
other end
this
and make
specimen
that
here is a
sometime.
little old, but it still is showing mostly what you want to see. But ideally, I would have wanted to find this like 3 days before this one was harvested. And this color, fresh specimen, is pumpkin orange, the same orange as a pumpkin. This is just a little bleached out, but it should be really orange. And then the underside is the yellow, like the sulfur, chemistry class sulfur yellow. Okay? And it's growing on shelves. You see how it grows in layers like that. So this is pretty typical to see layer after layer after layer like that, growing right on the wood, on a tree, on a stump, on a log. That's where you're going to see it. And so you see how there's no gills here. This is just a polypore mushroom. So the spores are dropping out of pores in the underside of this cap. So there are no poisonous lookalikes to this mushroom. There are a few people that eat a sulfur shelf and they might get, digestive discomfort from it. But they'll get better right away. It's just, it doesn't seem to agree with everybody. But for most people, they can eat it and enjoy it. So once again, on a mushroom like this, I'm just trimming off the tender flesh on the outside part. That's right. That's going to be the tender part right here. That's nice and flexible. This part right here that's tough, you have to hack away at, that's going to be increasingly indigestible.
I wish I would have known that the first time I tried.
So that's the sulfur shelf mushroom. Okay. Yes. But 3 days earlier, I would have eaten the whole thing. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk about the chanterelles. So these are the yellow chanterelles. And remember, I was telling you this color is the same as the color of an egg yolk or the center stripe in the middle of a highway. And you see, if you look on the underside of the cap, these are not really true gills. They're not separate structures. They're just forked ridges on the underside of the cap. And these grow singly on the ground, not in clusters and not on wood. And not orange, but this yellow color. All right? So that's what you remember about that one. And then these are what known as boletes here. Actually, this is a bolete too. I'm going to teach this one first because this is a very distinctive mushroom. This is called a Talopolis chromopes, chrome-footed bolete. This is kind of an old specimen, and the way I know that is because mushroom caps when they're young, they're this shape, and as they get older, they do this. And so once they're really splayed out like that, this is an old one. So this is not a very appetizing mushroom. But this species is a good one to know. It's the only one that looks just like this. So what you want to see, this color is going to be pink, and it's going to have this bright yellow foot. So when you pull it out of the ground, if you get the entire mushroom, this part is bright yellow. So this part is pink, this part is bright yellow, and then it has this spongy layer that will be white or sort of an off-white color in a young specimen. The only mushroom that has those color combinations. And this is a safe edible. You want to get them relatively young, and you want to cook them relatively quickly because they don't store well. But other than that, perfectly safe, yummy mushroom.
Can I add something? This has only spongy things.
Yes.
So all the mushrooms that have spongy things are edible?
No.
I thought you said that.
No, what I said is, I said there aren't any deadly poisonous folies. Okay? Thank you for asking for that clarification. Okay, so it is a relatively safe mushroom family. So this kind right here, this is called the chicken fat pseuilus because the top actually looks like chicken fat, and the underside has these yellow pores. And this one isn't quite as yummy as this one, but some people like it, and it has kind of a lemony flavor. So this is all the same right here. This is just different states of the same mushroom. So young one, middle-aged, older, like
Can I ask
that.
a quick question?
Yes.
Do you peel the sponge layer away on yolk leeks, or do you leave it intact?
It depends. If it's a really young mushroom and the spores, the spongy layer is really young, I leave it on. But if it's a little bit older and if you peel it off, that's usually the mushiest part of the mushroom. And so if you don't like your mushrooms to be slimy, then if you peel off that part, they're usually a little better. Okay, and then right here, this is called the Pseuilus pictus, or the painted Pseuilus, and these remind me of snickerdoodle cookies when I see them, because they look like that in the top. They're very pretty mushrooms. They have this mottled red pattern on top, red and yellow, and then the yellow spongy layer on the underside. And these you typically find under hemlocks or more frequently under white pine trees. So look for that.
Edible-wise, they're okay?
Yes, they're not really yummy, but they are edible.
They call them mediocre in the new book ours.
Yeah. If they're young, they're good. Okay, so then this mushroom right here, so this is the sweet tooth mushroom. You see I was talking about the teeth on the underside of the cap? So pass that around and get a good look at the teeth on the underside of the cap. So here, pass that around that way. And look at the teeth on the underside of the cap. And so, once again, there are no poisonous tooth mushrooms. There are some that don't taste good, but there aren't any that would cause you to get sick. Tooth. Well, no, there are some spongy.
Put it up against your red
ones that can make you
shirt.
sick. Okay. But there aren't any tooth mushrooms.
If you're unsure, just try a little bit, even if as long as you know what's up.
Well, that is a good point. I should have made that earlier in the talk. Okay, so everybody listening?
Yes.
All right. It is true that you could be allergic or have an idiosyncratic adverse reaction to some food that you've never tried before, and you don't know that because you've never tried that food before. So the standard advice is to not eat a huge amount of some new food you're trying for the first time, just to make sure you don't break all out in hives or whatever. So have a modest amount, just to make sure that you personally don't have an adverse reaction to it. And then, it seems fine, you can eat more the next time and so on. Okay, thank you for making that point. All right. Oh, yeah, thank you. All right, so let's talk about the black chanterelles, which are these guys right here. So this is the trompette de mort that I mentioned before, but it's just a silly name because these are totally safe. It does look sort of like a leaf. So these are hard to see. Yeah, so that is a leaf, but this is an edible mushroom right here. Okay, so pass these around. So, okay, so right. So the challenging part about the black chanterelle is seeing the first one. Once you see the first one, stop in your tracks and start looking around because you often will see more of them. Sometimes dozens more, sometimes hundreds more.
Have you ever found those?
So I usually see these under beech trees.
I don't know, I'd be afraid to.
Sometimes they grow in clusters like this, but usually they grow singly by themselves. Okay, so
Does black chanterelles have a poisonous look like?
But I'll tell you.
do black chanterelles and poisons look like? The answer is no. I'm happy to say. Okay. So let's do this one last. Okay, so this is the head of the woods mushroom. The ones I was showing you that can get to be a foot or more in diameter. So this is a relatively small one. And this one right here, I can feel with my fingers that the core of it is quite tough. So I wouldn't eat this part, but I would certainly trim off the tender part off the mushroom. What I do with these is I smell them. And if there's very little odor, that will be fresh enough to eat. If they're starting to reek a little bit, it's past its prime, in my opinion. And so this is called a head of the woods mushroom. So it's a cousin of this one. They're both polyporous, because see, no gills, just this porous layer where the spores are dropping out there. And this is a typical color. They can be a little bit more brownish or a little bit sort of beige color or gray, but that's what they look like. Right. These are also called maitake is the Japanese name. They actually know how to cultivate these, and so you see these in a lot of menus, but I'm happy to say a lot of mushrooms on menus, like when you see the maitake, it's actually grown and then sold to the restaurant. And I actually like that. I want to just share with you one complete change of mind I had. Many years ago, when I would see a restaurant menu, they'd say wild mushrooms. Out of curiosity, you'd say to the server, what are the wild mushrooms? And they say, oh, they're portobellos and criminies. And they're not wild at all. They're just not your standard store-bought. And I used to think, this is totally misleading advertising. I can't believe these people are doing that. And now I feel the complete opposite. It's like the more they put cultivated mushrooms on the menu, the happier I am. And the less that they're going out and taking, wild organisms and converting them to cash. I don't like that. Because it would make me sad that, this place in New Hampshire I'm not worried about, but there's some places like near the resortier areas in New Hampshire, or like, Stowe, Vermont, or Camden, Maine, where there's foofy, fancy restaurants, or people are happy to pay through the nose for mushrooms. If you're just a regular person and you go out in the woods to look for mushrooms there, you cannot find them, because the people that pick for money have been there before you and taken all those mushrooms, and the only way you're going to get those mushrooms is to pay through the nose for them at a fancy restaurant. That's like ticket scalping to me. It just feels so, so that's why if a restaurant says wild mushroom and it's actually not wild, I don't care anymore. It used to bug me, but now it's fine. The more, especially like a mushroom like this, they can call it wild, even though somebody grew it for them, because it does actually grow in the wild too. And I'm happy to let them say wild mushroom in the menu.